vested interest, but they cried out to us. In fact, they used the words like, "I appeal to you to do something. Please do something for the SPCA." So people really have a lot of respect for that group. So I'm just saying they need to be supported so that they can do the work that needs to be done. And if in another part of the province, because I know we have different agencies in different counties or whatever, then maybe there's others. Just the SPCA? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Anyway, we just need to support them. That's all I'm saying. I think on behalf of the people that I represent in Clayton Park, they've been loud and clear in saying they want to see adequate support to the SPCA, and they don't ever want to face a time when the SPCA says, I can no longer do that work. I can't protect animals. I don't have the power or the legislation to do it right. So we're working on the legislation today so that they'll actually be able to move and take action when there is distress, when there is animal anxiety. That will be better defined, and animals will be better protected as a result. I still think this is a step in the right direction. There may be further that we should go. I think there are further measures needed. And I'm looking forward to seeing who comes to law amendments and what we might hear when the public has an opportunity to speak there. But I do think that it's a good thing that the minister was listening and that he's brought amendments forward that are going to strengthen this act. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I now recognize the honourable member for Pictou East on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In the East Gallery, I would like to make an introduction. I have introduced these two special people in the past, in fact, maybe a number of times, but they are Pictonians that do a lot of work for those who have been injured in accidents. And I would like Mary Lloyd, the president of the Pictou County Injured Workers Association, and Larry Maloney, the vice president, to stand and receive a warm welcome from the House.
Welcome all of our guests to the gallery today and hope you enjoy today's proceedings. If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the contribution by other members. I got to say, the member for Kings West spoke so long and said so little. As far as giving me something that I could go back with, he didn't seem to like the act. Didn't say what was wrong with it. And didn't really offer me anything that was going to be helpful at all. I want to make it clear that when I indicated that actually the first change, significant change for the Animal Protection Act came under the Liberals in '96, which he indicated was a good bill, and so we're amending the bill for the second time since 2009, Madam Speaker. The previous Conservative government, under the minister who was from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, they also made changes to the act. The notion that for some reason we're going to draft regulation and not consult the whole process around regulations, and I'll just refer members back to the fur regulations, the Fur Industry Act. My staff, when we started that process, they told me it would take 3 years to draft the regulations. I said I want them in 1. We got them in 2. And that was a lot of consultation, I have to say, Madam Speaker, with all the stakeholders. That is what I've indicated will happen in terms of regulations for this piece of legislation. I'm really hoping at some point we will get all interested parties in a room if we can. And I think what we'd like to do is probably present a draft of regulations looking at what regulations have been written across the country. We looked at what other jurisdictions were doing. I do want to say that in recent decisions by judges in this province, They have issued a ban on keeping pets by people who they felt they should do that. So they have that power now. So we don't need to put that in the act. I want to make it. It's not in the act. The judges have that power now. It's not in the act. They've been doing it. So the health certificate requirement is something that came from this minister. That was something I wanted in this legislation, and I think when the member from Kings West talked about somebody selling pups from the back of the truck, the honourable the member for Argyle indicated a kennel that he knew, what a good job they did where he had gotten his pup, and if he had agreed to meet them in a parking lot somewhere to get the pup from the back of their truck, then somehow there's something wrong with them, you know, for doing that. If you go to the Nova Scotia or Atlantic Stockyard now, which used to be the cattle sales in Murray Siding, there would be people there who would probably be selling Border Collie pups out of the back of their truck. What we want to ensure is that they're healthy. If they're healthy, that's the requirement that we deem to be necessary. And we'd like to think that if somebody tries, goes somewhere to meet someone to buy a pup and they don't have that health certificate, number one, they don't buy it. Number two, they complain about it. They notify us. So the act, the fines apply to farm animals as well as to pets. There are two bodies that investigate animal cruelty investigations in this province. The SPCA does companion animals. The province does farm animals. And we've been doing this for a couple of years now. We took that responsibility away from the SPCA, which we assumed would give them a bit of a bump in funding, in the sense it should release some funding that they were spending on farm animal investigations. The SPCA has a 100% conviction rate presently in this province. So we look forward to moving on, seeing this bill move forward through the House and see what representations do come from the public or various organizations through two law amendments. It would be my hope that certainly before June, if that's possible, that we can get underway on the regulation part of this. I have no date set for when they might be ready. I'd like to say by the end of the year, but that process, and I don't think we're going to have to draft a lot of regulations. I do want members to be aware that in terms of tethering, the member for Clayton Park mentioned about tethering in my speech. It was in my speech at the Fairview Veterinary Hospital. The media asked me about it. I didn't see much in the media about my response to it. We've written the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association for an opinion. Their opinion is around kennels, which says it shouldn't be the primary way to restrain a dog. They also have a committee that is working on regulation around sled dogs and security pets. We wrote them back and said, well, our interest mainly is around companion animals, dogs that are household pets for people. Do you have a position? And so we haven't heard back from them yet on that, but we would intend to incorporate whatever they could tell us into our discussions with people around what would happen around tethering. So I didn't hear much in the media around what I said about it. But I have said something about it, and so I put that on the record here today, so that people are aware. It is an emotional issue, cruelty to animals, and I would like to use the expertise of animal health professionals as much as possible, so we ensure we get to a place that is not based on emotion, but is based on the health needs of animals that people consider with a lot of affection in their homes. So anyway, did we get this perfect? Probably not. I think we moved a long way in a short period of time that we've been in government, and that certainly doesn't mean that I'm opposed to listening into the future. Legislation is one of those things that can be fluid over time. We keep changing, and I'm willing to look at that. So with those comments, I thank members opposite and look forward to this bill going to law amendments and move second reading of Bill number 55, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill number 55, Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried.
Bill number 55, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 33 of the Acts of 2008, the Animal Protection Act.
Order this bill be sent to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 57, Language Schools Act?
Bill number 57, the Language Schools Act. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 57 now be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to speak to legislation that will help protect international students that get educated in our province, Speaker. It would allow these international students to study at schools that value the high quality of education for as long as it takes to complete their studies. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is the first province to introduce such legislation that will regulate language schools and protect our international students. This bill will ensure that the language schools meet a certain quality and standard, protection of students, and investment in their education. Speaker, this bill will also protect Nova Scotia's reputation as an education destination of choice for all international students. It will ensure that international students will continue to have access to the best, highest quality education and training to prepare them for their future. Speaker, we certainly value all of our international students, and we want to continue to attract international students to this great province. They contribute to our economy and certainly to our diversity. This bill will also align with changes to the Federal International Student Program that require provinces to designate language schools. Mr. Speaker, with these few short words, I now again move Bill 57 for second reading.
Thank you. Now recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today on Bill 57, which is this Act for International Schools. It's called just the Language Schools Act. And this act is for schools that are teaching English here in Nova Scotia. I was interested to see there are 12 schools right now with 1,500 students that are here in our province. One question I would have for the minister is at the end of the press release that was on the website, somebody told me earlier to look at the Animal Act on the website, but on the website it does say that this would relate to programs over 6 months. And maybe in his closing comments, the minister might refer to which programs are covered, because I do know a lot of programs exist in our province which are summer programs, and students come here from various countries to spend just perhaps 6 weeks or 2 months studying English and having the experience of being in an English-speaking environment and so on. One such program was actually run at the Cornwallis Business Park that was down in the valley, and that one that I've heard of, I don't know if it's still going, but it was actually Arabic women that were coming to that program, and it was favored. I think they were coming from Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken. It was favored because it was a very safe environment. It's rural, it's a small community, and they felt it was a very good place for women to go and study English and be in a what they would consider to be, I guess, a good and wholesome environment. And so we have in Nova Scotia some wonderful facilities, universities, private schools, facilities like Cornwallis Centre, and those are offering an opportunity to create that school curriculum and bring students in for a summer.
Order, please. The chatter is getting a little high, and I would ask that you tame it down so that the Honourable Member from Halifax Clayton Park can finish her comments. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park has the floor.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have a lot of opportunities to have language schools, and they may not always be the longer term, 6 months or 1 year programs. So I would like to know if there'll be standards set for the shorter programs that also exist. And I know there are very much study and learning tours that go on in the province as well, where students are toured around Nova Scotia and learning English at the same time. And some of them are quite small, so I'd be interested to know how that will be affected. I'd also be interested to know how the industry as a whole feels. I do see that there were quotes made by East Coast School of Languages, and they were positive, but this is a bill that I hadn't heard anything of prior to its introduction. So I imagine we'll hear more of that when we get to law amendments, and I'm sure any schools that are impacted will want to have a say, or at least, I hope they know that it's coming through, because it's going to impact their business if they have to have a certain curriculum or standard that's going to be set. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're a destination province for education, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be as well for language education. I mentioned we have a lot of positives in that regard. The size of our communities, the friendliness of the people here, our willingness to be friendly and open, I think, to talk to people and help them learn a new language. And I think we have a lot to show people who come here. So we've got a lot of beauty and a lot of tourism assets that can help as well in learning a language. So I know that there are many that come to the city. I have neighbours that have often hosted students that are studying at the language institutes and have them in their homes. It's been wonderful for their children, because they also meet people from around the world and get to interact as they're learning English. So we then benefit by learning the culture of another place. And Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity in some years ago, when I was recently graduated from university, of living in other countries, and I know that there's a tremendous interest in learning English. And the first country I lived in was Korea. I spent 3 years living in South Korea, and that was some time ago, before they had begun to travel much abroad themselves. And learning English was a very big thing for them, and they had almost an insatiable appetite to take English classes and to hire English people to correspond and chat with them. And there were a lot of schools there that Canadians were employed at. And now I know many of them are traveling to Canada and, hopefully more to Nova Scotia to do just the same thing. And it was my first introduction to just how valuable it is to have that international language. And for other countries, the people that gain the facility with English really do get a leg up in terms of employment and opportunity. So, we have something that's valuable that we can share with the rest of the world. What we need to do is, I think, also be advertising it and be helping to promote our province as a learning destination. And we do that with our universities. We have a fairly high ratio of international students at our universities. And I would, since this really does, in fact, involve international students, I would be remiss if I didn't mention at the same time that I think it's a great loss that our provincial nominee stream is no longer going to look at the international student stream, and that the federal government, the Harper government, has said that they want to control all of that immigration of the international students to Canada, and that we don't have that opportunity anymore. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's particularly damaging to Nova Scotia because we have so many first-class educational institutions. We have many universities. We have some terrific community colleges. We have these language institutes that people want to come to, and therefore we have a great pool of international students that are here that want to make Nova Scotia their home. And if it is no longer a stream within the Nova Scotia nominee program, we don't have the opportunity then to have a direct influence on them staying in our province and encouraging them to stay. So I think that it's important that we note that avenue, that stream, which I believe was the second most utilized stream in our province last year or the year before, I know the minister will have a look at that perhaps. The third most utilized was the community identified. I think it's skills, international students, and community identified for last year. So we're going to lose at least an avenue of capturing these well-educated international students who've already studied and lived and been here in Nova Scotia. And I think it's really a travesty, Mr. Speaker, that we're not going to have that opportunity anymore. I certainly was not privy to whatever pressure was brought to bear on Nova Scotia for us to abandon that stream. Maybe we had absolutely no choice, but I would think within our own nominee stream, they've already capped us at 500 people, never given us an increase in the number of primary applicants that we can choose. We're allowed 500 applicants, and bearing in mind that each one may come with a family unit, so there's more than 500 people. But we've only been given 500. They haven't given us any more in the almost, I think, 10 years now. It's been more than 10 years that we've had a nominee program. I believe it came here in 2002. And so unlike, I believe it's Manitoba that has 5,000, we're in a much different category. And the international students are a big part of what, you know, a pool of really smart, wonderful young people, by and large young people that we could utilize to come and be immigrants to our province. So that is a problem, and I do believe some who come here to study in the language institutes may very well want to come back when they have a facility with language, when they get the English under their belt and can speak well, that they'll want to come back and continue to study here in our province. So it's another avenue to encourage people to come. It's another avenue to set a standard where we become the best in the country in terms of quality and the offering that we're giving to international students, the assurance that they'll get when they come here to learn English, that we have set standards. And I think I gather, and I don't know if this has ever happened before, Mr. Speaker, the minister didn't give us very much preamble on the bill. Perhaps he has a bigger closing statement, I don't know. But in the press release that came out, it says that this will also protect the student's investment if a school closes. So if there's a school that has taken some deposits or money from students, or perhaps the students have even come here, and then these are private institutions, so if they become bankrupt or disappear or aren't sustainable, the students won't lose their investment in the money that they've put into that program. And I think that is another good selling point as we try to market Nova Scotia as a learning destination. And we don't have that many sectors that we can say we really are unique and special in, but education is one of them, that we really can, we already have decades of reputation to build on. We have these wonderful institutions that students for a long time have been coming here. Dalhousie's over 100 years old. I think St. Mary's University's been around that long, and many others. And we have the basis of a wonderful education system and offering for international students. And we've been having students from around the world come here for many, many years. So then they can send their children, or people return to their own countries, move up the ladder and take positions in government or industry, and they're sending other people back here as well because they know Nova Scotia and they know what we offer. So in keeping with that, improving our language schools is a very smart thing to do. Again, I mentioned in the last bill we might be the first to do something in the sale of animals, and here we have a first as well. And it says that Nova Scotia is the first province to introduce legislation that will regulate language schools. I'm glad to see that we're first out of the gate. It doesn't mean we're going to be unique, though, because it says that I think the federal government is requiring this now of other provinces. So maybe the minister might want to relate to that as well, but it says that this legislation aligns us with the federal government's changes to their international student program that requires language schools across the country to be designated. So we have a little bit of a jump on other places, but we're not going to remain the only province with these standards. It's going to become across the country eventually. So I hope that the government might have a plan to help the schools capitalize on the fact that we've got these in place. I hope if there's any regulations to be written that they'll be done in a timely fashion. I don't know about the time frame that the government is looking at to bring this properly into place. It always requires proclamation and so on. But I think it is important, and if all provinces in the country are going this way, then let's capitalize on the fact that this legislation has been brought in here before any of the other provinces have done so. So overall, Mr. Speaker, I think that it's an important move that we're doing this, that we've gotten out of the gate before other provinces, that we are going to set these standards. I would like to know whether or not there'll be any standards set for schools that are summer schools or shorter duration programs, because I think there's a big demand for those programs as well. And as I say, I think it's a priority that we protect the reputation we have in Nova Scotia as an education province and a learning destination. So with that, I'll be interested again at law amendments to hopefully hear from some of the other language schools that will have a stake in this and see what recommendations they have as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise for very briefly to speak to Bill 57, the Language Schools Act. As the member from Clayton Park has referenced, there are 12 language schools in Nova Scotia with about 1,500 students, and I know that in particular Mackenzie College Language Academy in Sydney and the International Centre for English Academic Preparation at CBU are both pleased with this legislation coming forward. You know, Mr. Speaker, this bill will assist in the efforts to attract more international students to Nova Scotia for language training. And we look forward not only to the international students coming here, but the benefits that could accrue as a result of their being here and hopefully remaining in this province. So we look forward to the bill proceeding to allow amendments to hear what might say and then carry on to third reading. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the Deputy Premier and the House for that warm welcome. I want to spend a few minutes. I'd be remiss if I didn't speak on this bill put forth by the government side, and I think the Deputy Premier, certainly all the members of the House, but those that have seen some of the impact that the language schools have had in Cape Breton and with the Cape Breton economy. I think it's important just to talk about some of those things, and I do look forward, as my colleague from Clayton Park had mentioned, seeing what the teeth is for this bill. I think that there's some important measures and there's some important aspects that hit the students, the international students that come here to study and to learn our languages, and of course move on to university, because that is ultimately the idea, and that is ultimately the relationship that exists. The member for Victoria the Lakes just mentioned ICEAP, which has is a direct relationship with CBU and provides a group of students that come over from mostly China, some influence in Saudi Arabia as well, and they bring students over. This school has had a tremendous relationship with CBU for, I think it's about 3 years now. As we read, the member from the Lakes referenced a story about how they're appreciative of this legislation moving forward, and in fact had a hand in crafting some of this legislation. The reality is that with 500 students, and that's pretty much their maximum, mostly located in Glace Bay at the former Morrison High School site, with a few of their advanced classes move out to CBU, and then they naturally jump into the university stream out there at CBU. So it's a very good partnership, and one that's important for us. It's important for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest one being the economic impact it's had. It's an amazing thing when you operate in such a fragile economy as many of the rural communities in the province do. You get to rely on those sources of income and those sources of revenue that without them you would be in trouble. And I think that probably the two largest ones for Glace Bay and sort of the surrounding area would be, of course, the Stream Call Centre, which we've mentioned many times here in the legislature, and the ICEAP campus. You know, it's an amazing thing, Mr. Speaker, seeing international kids that are 19, 20, 21 walking the streets, accessing the restaurants and the shops and all that Glace Bay has to offer. You've felt for a long time, and with the out-migration and with the unemployment, there seems to be a hollowing out of our society, and there's less people at the restaurants, and there's less people at the grocery stores and the hockey rinks, and just using the sidewalks and accessing the parks and those types of things. And we've really seen an influx and an increase in those things in Glace Bay, because of ICEAP. So it's certainly, you feel that economically, you feel that socially, and it's certainly the relationship between CBU, ICEAP, and my home community has been a great one. And I think that when you look at some of the changes that, again, that was referenced by my colleague from Clayton Park about the immigration stream and the fact that with some of the changes and students aren't, if they come to Nova Scotia, they're not fast-tracked through the immigration process where they get their landed status, and that has been an issue for ICEAP, and I'm sure they've referenced that to the government. And the reality is that there are a number of factors that lead to immigration and permanent immigration, as in students come as 19, 20-year-olds, they study, they reach their English proficiency, they enter in the CBU, and then they stay and have their lives and have their families and spend a lot of, many years in Cape Breton. So it's certainly a challenge, and that's one that, we have to address with public policy, certainly from the municipal perspective, the provincial perspective, and the federal. So they are challenges, but they're also opportunities. And I know that CBU has done great in the last number of years. And when you see a lot of problems and challenges that many of the Nova Scotia universities face, it seems like CBU is actually an anomaly with that, and that's for a number of reasons. The strengthening of academic programs, of course, their long-term facilities management projects that they've done very, very well, and of course their immigration strategy. There's partnerships across the globe with respect to CBU, many in China and Southeast Asia, the Middle East. I was part of one in Cairo, Egypt for a year. It was an incredible experience, and it's an amazing thing to see the kids that started at that school. You start post-secondary when you're 17 in Cairo, and to see the difference that those students went through from that point when I met them to when they're 23, 24, graduating here in Nova Scotia from CBU, from the engineering program at Dow, and the like. So it's an incredible thing for our culture, and certainly has been a very worthwhile injection for Cape Breton University. And I know that all the language schools across the province, in conjunction and in partnership with some of those other institutions, have felt the benefit. And I think this is a good thing. So I'm glad I know that the Deputy Premier sees this and hears these concerns and hears the ideas coming from CBU and ICEAP. And it's we look forward to moving this in this reading and finding out some of the details, because I think it'll be beneficial for the province. And with that, I'll sit down.
Thank you. If I'm to recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. The Honourable, the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting in a debate around international schools, and it invariably goes to English as the second language. There I go. And you had three Cape Bretoners following each other. I'm reminded of the story, Mr. I'm reminded of the story, Mr. Speaker, and the member from Glace Bay may remember his father telling him stories about this gentleman. But Angus Blue MacDonald was a very famous councillor from the town of Glace Bay, and he had a vocabulary onto his own, Mr. Speaker. But he had very heavy Cape Breton slang, if you will, which I think we're all very proud of. But nonetheless, so the story goes about Angus Blue was at the Dominion Command Convention for the Legion. And Angus Blue got up, and part of the discussion that day was, should the proceedings be held in both English and French? And Angus Blue got up and he riles off his dems and those and these and that's, and so he sits down, and some people applauded, some people didn't. But the story goes that this very British-sounding gentleman gets up and says, really, you know, comrades, does it really matter if we speak in English, French, or the language that gentleman just spoke in? So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the members for their intervention. The member from Clayton Park, I will endeavour to get some of those answers, especially around courses and lengths, and I appreciate this. And the purpose of the bill is for really, on the other side, is the protection of the students too when they come. You know, we've heard some complaints about hidden fees, and we want to protect them, but it's also important that we protect our image. Because again, we are, maybe I'm overstating this, Speaker, but you know, we are really the pioneer when it comes to international students, because we have Coady Institute at St. FX. And I mean, that has, that's been entrenched, and we've had people from all over the world, but more particular, the African countries go there. So this shouldn't be anything new. I guess, to make sure everyone knows that if there's a perception of bias here, Mr. Speaker, I should also tell you that my daughter is now beginning her master's, and she's partway through it, and her master's is on English as a second language. So she probably wonders what her father's first language is too. So, Mr. Speaker, there's many things in here, and I want to tell the members opposite I really appreciate their points of view. I will attempt to, particularly in the items that the member from Clayton Park had brought forward, which were I got to say, were reasonable and very thoughtful. I would wish that we would be able to get those answers for her as soon as we possibly can through the department. So with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 57.
The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill number 57, the Language Schools Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried.
Bill number 57, entitled An Act Respecting Language Schools for International Students.
Order this bill be sent to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 59, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act?
Bill number 59, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act. I recognize the Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to move Bill number 59, an act to amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act, to now be read a second time. And I'm pleased to rise in the House today to speak about Bill 59, and it's certainly an important act in the history of our province. And this is about the designation, of course, of Sable Island as Canada's 43rd National Park. And I first announced the intent to make these changes back on October 17, 2011, the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding for the establishment of Sable Island as a national park, and introduced the amendment to the bill in this legislature just yesterday. And Mr. Speaker, these changes are the final stage in a process to make Sable Island Canada's 43rd National Park and protect its unique ecosystems. The amendments put into law guidelines around oil and gas activity on and near Sable Island, and they mirror amendments taking place at the federal level. And the proposed legislative changes are a significant milestone in that process. The Canada and Nova Scotia governments have been working together for some time to reach this stage. And Mr. Speaker, we started by identifying which protection legislation would be the best tool to legally protect Sable Island into the future. And it quickly became clear that we needed to work to designate Sable Island as part of the national park system. And I'm happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that through a federal-provincial agreement, we were able to chart the course. The provincial and federal governments negotiated a parks establishment agreement that was signed by the federal minister responsible for parks and the Premier at a news conference back in October of 2011. Mr. Speaker, the agreement outlined the terms under which the park would be established, and it included enshrining in legislation a ban on drilling from the surface and within 1 nautical mile of Sable Island. And I want to add, Mr. Speaker, that the Petroleum Ministry has always been sensitive to preserving Sable Island's environment. Oil and gas companies have voluntarily complied with this drilling ban for years. And our work resulted in a memorandum of agreement between our two governments with a commitment to move forward with legislative amendments. Mr. Speaker, our federal counterparts introduced draft legislation to create the Sable Island National Park Reserve in Parliament on February the 12th of this year, and included were proposed changes to the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act. Those changes are currently being considered in Parliament. In fact, Mr. Speaker, our Communities, Culture and Heritage Minister, who's also the MLA for Halifax Citadel Sable Island, visited Ottawa recently to update members of the Senate on Nova Scotia's plans and progress on the legislative changes, and his testimony contributed to the federal legislative review process. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that Nova Scotia is also moving forward with amendments to the provincial version of the Accord Act that will advance the designation of the Sable Island National Park Reserve. The amendments mirror changes to the federal version of the Act and represent the final stage of the process. Mr. Speaker, protecting Sable Island's environment and ecosystems has been the central focus of these legislative changes. In designating Sable Island as a national park, we are taking further steps to protect its environmental and cultural features. The amendments seek to put into law a ban on drilling on or within 1 nautical mile of Sable Island. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to review each proposed change and explain the context. I know that most members would have the bill with them or in front of them. And the first change that's outlined there is, Mr. Speaker, will establish a law, as I mentioned, to ban drilling from the surface of Sable Island and within 1 nautical mile. The drilling ban will help protect Sable Island's natural environment and ecosystems. Mr. Speaker, the second amendment outlines what petroleum-related activities would be permitted on Sable Island. These would include access to existing wellheads for safety and environmental protection. And there are 9 old wellheads on the island that were last used in the 1960s. And occasionally sand blows away from these wellheads, leaving them exposed. So this will allow them to be covered back up and be fully maintained. The second amendment would also restrict petroleum exploration activities to those with a low impact on the environment. And this would include things like small soil or sand samples or string and listening devices above the sand. Mr. Speaker, the amendment would also allow Sable Island to be used as an emergency evacuation capacity for offshore workers if that was ever needed, and certainly also would allow access for operation, maintenance, and inspection of emergency facilities, including a helicopter landing pad. I'm sure we can all agree that this is a necessary allowance to protect those working near the Sable Island. Mr. Speaker, the third proposed change requires the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board to consult with Parks Canada before issuing permits for any petroleum-related activities on the island. And again, this would help protect Sable Island and ensure any proposed offshore activity respects the island's designation as a national park. So, Mr. Speaker, I also want to reinforce the role of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board in enforcing strict regulations to ensure the safety of the environment in connection with the petroleum activities. The board will work alongside Parks Canada to ensure that Sable Island is carefully managed and preserved. Today's proposed changes represent the final step in a process that started with a memorandum of understanding between the federal and provincial governments back in 2010, and I'm very pleased to see it moving forward towards this final stage. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia will continue to be involved in the management of Sable Island as part of the Canada-Nova Scotia Committee. The province will have input on the integrity and the management of natural and heritage features on Sable Island. And Mr. Speaker, there is perhaps no one more interested in the future of Sable Island than well-known naturalist So Lucas. So has been on the island for decades, studying the wildlife and the flora and fauna, and really helping to tell Sable Island's story. So Lucas supports the move to make Sable Island a national park. And yesterday, she said, and I want to quote here, Mr. Speaker, quote, "The designation of Sable Island as a national park reserve is the beginning of a new era for the island. Parks Canada will bring expertise and authority to environmental protection, the conservation of ecological values, and the management of human activities," unquote. So, Mr. Speaker, this show of support from So Lucas confirms that designating Sable Island as a national park is a step in the right direction. And I want to thank our federal counterparts for their dedication to this process and for recognizing the importance of preserving such a significant provincial and national landmark. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to express appreciation for the support that we have received from the offshore oil and gas industry. From the beginning, industry has recognized how important it is to protect Sable Island, and it has led the way in efforts to minimize the activity or the impact of activities in that area. So, Mr. Speaker, today's proposed amendments are another step towards ensuring that the island gets the national profile and protection that it deserves. And Sable Island certainly has been a part of Nova Scotia's history and a part of Nova Scotia's culture. It's often known as the graveyard of the Atlantic, home of the famous and beautiful horses, and a sandy ecosystem that does not exist really anywhere else. Mr. Speaker, passage of the federal and provincial bills will allow the designation to be completed and Sable Island then to become a national park. Approving these amendments is the last step that Nova Scotia needs to make the Sable Island Canada's 43rd national park, and certainly Nova Scotia's 3rd national park. And at the federal level, the amendments are now in the Senate, and then will go before the House of Commons. So, with those few brief remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to close, and the process will unfold as it should, and with Parks Canada's participation and participation of Nova Scotia as well. So thank you for listening.
Chair now recognizes the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on behalf of the official opposition to indicate our support for Bill number 59, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act. As indicated by the Minister, this is meant to assist in the development of the Sable Island as a national park. Speaker, I've had the pleasure of fishing not far from Sable Island, probably closer than most have, on Bankrow Bank, but I know that many of the fishermen from my area, especially the snow crab fishermen now, and probably from your area as well, Mr. Speaker, are not that far off the coast of Sable Island, where they are fishing for snow crab. It's an important landmark both for us here on land and certainly for fishermen who are out there as well. The amendments here, as indicated by the Minister, mirror some federal changes that are taking place. It's going to amend in the final step to have Sable Island designated as Canada's 43rd national park. We're certainly proud of that designation. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has already indicated some of the changes that are taking place regarding ban on drilling from the surface and within 1 nautical mile of Sable Island, as well as some of the other rules that are in place. And I'm pleased the Minister has acknowledged that many of the companies involved in the exploration of offshore petroleum and gas have been cognizant and respectful of Sable Island and the unique area that it is. With that, Mr. Speaker, we look forward to this bill moving on to law amendments and making its way through the House, and certainly hope that in conjunction with the federal government that we will soon see the official declaration of Sable Island as Canada's 43rd national park. Merci.
Thank you. We will now recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the PC caucus to stand in my place today and support Bill 59, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act. As we all know, Sable Island is culturally important to the province of Nova Scotia, and the oil and gas industry has adopted this policy unofficially for years now, and it will protect Sable Island's natural ecosystem, limit the activity in this area, and help produce it as our 43rd national park. And we know the changes mirror the changes that are being made federally, and it will give Parks Canada some control over the area, but Nova Scotia will still have its input on how the island is used. So I look forward to this moving through the law amendments and going through the normal business of the House, and we as the caucus will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm to recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. Certainly, the Honourable Member, or the Minister, I'm sorry, the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, who is also the member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to get up and say a few words here, both as the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, but also as the member of the legislature for Sable Island. Bill 59, Mr. Speaker, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act really doesn't do enough justice to the fact that this is really the implementation bill that will make Sable Island Canada's 43rd national park. And I'm delighted to be able to say a few words at this significant milestone. It's really quite a historic event, I think, in the province for the province of Nova Scotia and for Canadians at large. As you know, the genesis of this bill goes back a long, long time, and many people have called for this for decades, and we're delighted to be part of a government, a part of really two levels of government that have made this, this bill and this event possible. On October 17th, 2011, the Premier of Nova Scotia, along with Peter Kent, the Minister responsible for Parks Canada, signed a landmark agreement to make Sable Island a national park reserve. It was a great honor for me, Mr. Speaker, to be a witness to that agreement and to be able to sign that historic memorandum, which will help secure a future of greater protection for this unique island. This bill, Mr. Speaker, holds significance for all Canadians. For Nova Scotians in particular, it is especially meaningful because Sable Island is a part of our natural and cultural heritage. You know, with this bill and the enabling agreement in the federal House, both levels of government commit to protecting Sable Island for everyone, including especially for future generations. The bill recognizes that Sable Island is a unique and fragile ecosystem of provincial and national significance, and it is important that it is protected for present and future generations. Mr. Speaker, Sable Island holds a special place in the hearts of Nova Scotians and Canadians across the country. Its recorded history is long and detailed and spans more than 4 centuries. 42 kilometers long, the island is located 290 kilometers from Halifax, but it's an important part of my constituency. Over the years, Sable Island has been a place of ecological wonder, dramatic marine events, important meteorological and biological research, and artistic inspiration. Canada's first life-saving station, established in 1801, was built here. And if you haven't had the pleasure of a visit, it's been described in this way: isolated and remote, a wild and windswept island of sand far out in the North Atlantic, it is one of Canada's furthest offshore islands. It's a bird sanctuary home to the Ipswich sparrow and others, and 200-300-year-old lighthouses. Several hundred of the famous Sable Island wild horses roam freely, and the world's biggest breeding colony of gray seals uses its extensive beaches. Freshwater ponds hint at life-sustaining freshwater lens floating below the island. Plants, birds, and insects have adapted to life on Sable, some of which are found nowhere on Earth, Mr. Speaker. It's also the graveyard of the Atlantic, has numerous shipwrecks offshore. I'm sure you'd agree, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, that it's a perfect location for a national park, preserved for all Canadians and the world at large, now and for future generations. Designating this national preserve was truly a joint effort, working collaboratively with the federal government partners and other stakeholders. It took a large team, Mr. Speaker, to evaluate which protective legislation would work best to legally protect Sable Island for the future. As you know, Sable Island and the protection of Sable Island has been developed largely under the watchful eye of the Coast Guard. Through the Shipping Act. It seems a bit of an anachronism, Mr. Speaker, but I do want to give a shout out to the Coast Guard for the great work that it has done over the years in protecting Sable and controlling access to Sable Island. But we knew, Mr. Speaker, that Sable Island in this modern era needs greater protection. The Shipping Act itself no longer is as relevant to Sable as once was, and the Coast Guard has neither the capacity nor the authority anymore to do the kinds of things that we require done on Sable Island. So it became clear that the best choice was to advance Sable for designation as part of the national park system, and through the federal-provincial agreement, we began pursuing this plan. We worked on the best way forward, Mr. Speaker, while considering various interests, including offshore petroleum resources. With that in mind, both levels of government agreed to present legislation to prohibit drilling on the surface of Sable and out 1 nautical mile from the low water mark. And Mr. Speaker, I want to refer specifically to a clause which says that in this bill, which establishes the principle that no person shall drill or conduct any exploratory activity on or within a kilometre of Sable. It's an important 1 nautical mile of the low water mark. It is an important principle, Mr. Speaker, and it bears repeating because it has been misunderstood by some of the people who've commented on that on this bill in other places. The change in legislation will allow exploration will allow access to the island for non-intrusive activities, Mr. Speaker, for activities such as emergency evacuation of offshore workers, for passive listening devices across the sand to pick up sound from seismic offshore. But just to be clear, that it does not allow drilling from Sable or within the offshore, within 1 kilometre off the offshore. And keep in mind here, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about natural gas in that region and not oil. People have misunderstood petroleum to mean oil, and of course they have 2 very different implications for offshore regulation and pollution control. Any activity that's conducted on the island, Mr. Speaker, will require adherence to a code of practice for protection of the island, and will be regulated by the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board in consultation with Parks Canada. There will be a great deal of consultation on any activity that will be allowed on or around the Sable Island, and must conform to activity that will fit in with the Parks Canada raison d'etre. Once enshrined in law, Mr. Speaker, Sable Island surface will never again be drilled. The petroleum companies strongly supported this measure and volunteered to amend their discovery licenses to follow this provision. These licenses now have been amended and were approved by both federal and provincial levels of government. We are truly working together, Mr. Speaker, government, business, environmental groups, and other stakeholders to ensure that significant cultural, heritage, and ecological values of Sable Island is maintained now and for future generations. I want to give a shout out again, Mr. Speaker, to a number of people who over the years have been great defenders and promoters of Sable Island. The Minister has already spoken about Zoe Lucas, who is in many ways the Jane Goodall of Sable Island. She has been there for over four decades and has really exercised great stewardship and great responsibility for it. And the Green Horse Society has provided information and an early warning system for us over the years. Jerry Forbes, the station manager, there are a number of scientists who've been on Sable over the years. The Ecology Action Centre, Mark Butler, David Richardson, the Dean of Science, the former Dean of Science at St. Mary's University, and the Friends of Sable Island, April Henniger. In any case, Mr. Speaker, the amendments to these to the Accord Acts and this creation of Sable Island National Park is another step in the process of designating Sable Island as Canada's 43rd National Park. The Government of Canada and the Government of Nova Scotia will continue to carry out important work on Sable Island, such as scientific research and environmental, climate change, weather, and atmospheric monitoring. All parties agree, Mr. Speaker, that the best way to protect Sable is to have a human presence on Sable Island and to conduct scientific research there. And Nova Scotia, the Government of Nova Scotia will continue to provide advice on the ongoing management of the island through the Canada-Nova Scotia Committee. We will provide input on numerous topics, including ensuring the island's natural and cultural heritage is protected, studied, and interpreted for the benefit of all Canadians. I'd like to commend Parks Canada for their consultative approach to the establishment of Sable Island as a National Park Reserve, for their ongoing commitment to stakeholder consultation and inclusion. In particular, I want to thank Julie Tompa, the project manager, Kevin McNamee, the director of Parks Canada, for the work that they've done in bringing us to this point. I also want to note, Mr. Speaker, that this is a Sable Island National Park Reserve. The word reserve is there to allow for continuing consultation on the management and development of Sable Island. The Mi'kmaq community, the Mi'kmaq chiefs, agree in principle with the creation of this national park, and the federal government and the Parks Canada have committed to continuing consultation with them. And of course, we have the Made in Canada process here in Nova Scotia, which is highly regarded and respected. And we look forward to continuing discussions with Parks Canada as they move forward to the development of the management plan and then with the actual management plan itself. And we expect to be an integral part of that plan. Mr. Speaker, Sable Island is part of Nova Scotia and Canada's history and part of the national park system. It'll be a special part of our future. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank take this opportunity to thank the Federal Minister Kent, Ministers McKay, the Minister of Natural Energy and Natural Resources in this House, a number of bureaucrats, Harold Carroll in particular, Kim Himmelman, and all the members of our hardworking staff and the huge team of people at both levels of government who've contributed to this success. Sable Island is a precious historical and ecological treasure and must be protected in the best way possible, Mr. Speaker, and I believe this bill does just that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. The Honourable, the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all honourable members for their interventions, and I certainly also want to thank my colleague here beside me, the Minister of Culture, Heritage and Communities. And you know, you can certainly hear his passion, and he's worked long and hard on this to establish Sable Island as Canada's 43rd national park, and it would be Nova Scotia's third national park. So it's important for our province. So with those few brief remarks, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 59.
The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill 59, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried.
Bill number 59, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act.
Order that this bill be sent to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. I know. Mr. Speaker, but all good things must come to an end. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the House to now rise to meet from the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And after the daily routine, we will be doing government bills 51 and 61. After that, we'll do private and local bills, Bill 43, and for some real fun and games, we may do some address and reply. The speech in the throne, Mr. Speaker. So I ask you to now rise to meet from the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.
The motion before the House is that we now rise and meet again tomorrow between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour? Aye. Against? The motion is carried. We now stand adjourned. We have now reached the moment of interruption. Earlier today, the debate was announced under motion rule number 5, late debate topic. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly condemn the NDP's ability to erode Nova Scotians' income during each year of their governance while forcing more young Nova Scotians to vacate the province in search of work. And I now recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise this evening to join in the debate on the resolution that all members of this House of Assembly condemn the NDP's ability to erode Nova Scotia's income during each of their governance, while forcing more Nova Scotians to vacate the province in search of work. Mr. Speaker, in my time as MLA representing the great constituency of Cape Breton North, I've talked to all sorts of people, good, hard-working family people, from CEOs to fishermen, international representatives to small business owners. And one thing that they all have in common, and they like to talk about, is concern. Nova Scotia has hard-working, dedicated, and a driven population. Nova Scotians want to have the ability to provide for their families and enjoy our beautiful province. As a general statement, most people want to be able to make sure their kids have more than they had, regardless how good or bad your upbringing was. And Mr. Speaker, we heard today, and we've seen an article submitted, that our weekly incomes have increased by 0.6% since 2009. The cost of purchasing everyday items has increased by 10.7%. Mr. Speaker, with no jobs and people having to move to provide for their family, the whole family system breaks down. Mr. Speaker, if I could, I have a neighbor of mine who I grew up with, lived in the same neighborhood growing up, who moved away at a young age. He moved away and he joined the Navy, and after 4 or 5 years in the Navy, he met a lovely young lady, had a couple of children, and realized that living in Ontario wasn't a spot for him to be. He had a good paying job in Ontario, but knew the family life in Ontario wouldn't be what he grew up with, and wouldn't be what he'd want to have his children growing up in. So they as a family decided to move back home, as every Cape Bretoner who moves away desires to do at some point in their life, be it to work or just to retire there. And Mr. Speaker, he came home. His wife was fortunate with her education and background to get a good job, but he wasn't so fortunate. He had all kinds of skills and all kinds of training, but not able to get a good paying job. So what's his decision? To try to work out west. Now, Mr. Speaker, he got a good paying job out west, and he jumped from 2 or 3 jobs here and there, and he was home. He was gone for a couple of months and back home. But realizing being home and on unemployment wasn't enough to provide for his family. So he ends up with a real good paying job, and he's gone 8 to 10 months a year. But what happens when he's away? He doesn't get to see his family. He doesn't get to spend time with his children. He misses out on all kinds of family activities. School concerts, hockey games, dance recitals, piano recitals. And Mr. Speaker, this is a man who's a good family man and spends all the time he can with his family, especially when he's home. But now being away 8 to 10 months of the year, the family system breaks down. So I think the problem being is he'd love to have his family here with him out there, or he'd love to be home. But in order to survive, he has to make a decision. Now, he's still doing the away thing, Mr. Speaker, but my fear is that we're going to lose more people this way because of that. Some people will take whole families and move them from our island, from our province, because there's no work, which is eroding our system, as we talked about earlier. And Mr. Speaker, we also hear about people who are young workers, who are working in trades, who are leaving to get their apprenticeship hours. But over the last year or so, we hear them coming back and not being able to use those hours to apply towards their certification, to apply towards their red seal. So what are they doing? They're going out there and they're staying there in order to get their papers, their red seals. So that's 4 or 5 or 6 or more years that people are gone from our great province again. And we know that the incomes in the last 4 years are down, that they're the second slowest growing in the country. Like I said, 0.6% less earning than we did 4 years ago. Obviously, it's a terrible situation, But to make it worse, we talked about inflationary pressures. The highest inflationary pressures in the country. It's combined for a 10.7 increase in the last 4 years. Not only are we making less money, our goods and services are increasing. The gap has been very hard to deal with for our young people who are trying to start a family. They have student loans, they have mortgages, and they have children that have needs. They want to provide for their families, Mr. Speaker, but with the lack of income, the lack of jobs, it's getting more difficult. And as I talked about earlier, as a result, the difficult decision has to be made. Stay here in Nova Scotia, where the jobs are eroding. We know their wages are decreased, and inflation carries the price of goods and services to unaffordable levels for them. Or they can move away from our beautiful province where their opportunities lie. We know we have the highest taxes in the country. We have the highest power rates in the country. Business confidence is the lowest in the country. But worst of all, we don't see any plans to change this. The NDP's recently tabled budget actually calls for more job losses, higher unemployment, and a decrease in retail sales. And when we can question them on this on behalf of our constituency, asking hard questions like, how are you going to fix this? How can we fix the inflationary pressures? How can we create a competitive economy here in Nova Scotia? All we hear is our plan is working. Jobs here is working. We're having a hard time finding out where those jobs are. In Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, we have a disgustingly high unemployment rate of 18.6%, overall average on the island. And where I'm from, North Sydney, it's well over 30%. And we hear every day the government bragging about the good job they're doing, creating jobs. They may be creating jobs here in Halifax, but outside of Halifax and rural Nova Scotia, we're hurting, Mr. Speaker. We hear some people criticizing the moves of the NDP, which is easy to do because our economy is tanking, Mr. Speaker. We hear that they've increased the HST after promising not to. Watch energy prices skyrocket with their bite-the-bullet energy plan. But we're not hearing a lot of solutions to these problems. We, unlike the other two parties, Mr. Speaker, are proposing a plan to put Nova Scotians back to work. Decrease taxes, freezing power rates, and stopping wasteful spending. We feel in order to criticize, we must give a solution. And Mr. Speaker, that's what we're doing. We've seen businesses close from one end of our province to the other. Jobs that we lost due to the closure of the Yarmouth Ferry have their market impact even in places in Cape Breton Island. We spoke to the owners of the Avery Inn, and they've seen their occupancy rates decrease since the closure of the ferry. When a government can make such awful decisions like that, we see very clearly there's no understanding of this economy. And we will continue to stand and will continually stand idly by as our young people leave our beautiful province in search of work for stable wages. We can't create conditions like this in Nova Scotia as we've seen through the suffering people in the last 4 years. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton lost 4,400 jobs in the last 4 years, 18.6% unemployment, and 11,000 people in Cape Breton are unemployed. Mr. Speaker, that's 11,000 people who are not contributing to our economy, who are not contributing to our society. And Mr. Speaker, when we take that money out of our economy, we see what happens at Cape Breton. We now have a municipality that's looking for some money to do a capital plan to put people back to work. Because, Mr. Speaker, by putting these people back to work, we get our dignity back, and we keep people home where they belong with their families so they can contribute to society in volunteering, in different organizations, minor hockey, minor baseball. And, Mr. Speaker, that's where we as Cape Bretoners want to be, and that's where we want to stay. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And now recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry, Jeff. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I noticed in that resolution, which I read and found the grammatical structure a little obtuse. But anyway, the word in there is condemn. You know, I know my colleague from Colchester Muscatawbet Valley he's sort of the resident expert on condemnation, I think. So I might have to ask him why. I don't think we should be condemned. I don't think I should be, or my colleagues. I have to defend them. Of course, the premise is completely incorrect. So I'll offer up something here, and we'll see where we're going with this. And I'd like to focus it around actually 3 areas, if I could. You know, support we've put out there for families, support for students, and support for future jobs. And, you know, we engaged in the largest consultation probably ever in the province, former finance minister, when we got elected. And we listened to what Nova Scotians said, not to what somebody in the opposition party said, but what Nova Scotians said. And by the way, people in those parties could come out. As a matter of fact, in my area, lots of people from the Liberal and Conservative parties came out and they expressed their views, and we listened to them. And the general consensus was that we were in a bad spot and had to fix it. So we set about doing that. I know there was one year, for instance, I know the PCs are condemning us here, but there was one year that there was $695 million worth of unbudgeted spending made by that party, and you know, that seems to me to be a little obscene. But in any event, I want to focus on the positive. You know, Jack Layton said, let's not be boo birds. You know, let's be optimists, and let's move on. Let's not you know, roam around and wait around in despair. And that seems to be what's happening every day in here pretty well. So we're going to go to the upside here, and I want people to know that when we did have to deal with the structural deficit, which some people deny, that we listened to what the poverty activists and other people suggested to us, and we introduced a poverty reduction tax credit to sort of offset the increase in tax that provides tax-free quarterly payments to individuals and couples and families who find themselves in poverty. And we also created the affordable living tax credit, which we recognize helps families. It's difficult and expensive to live in this particular economy. The world economy has been suffering for some time, and that affordable living tax credit helps families and low-income and moderate-income earners, too, keep more of their hard-earned cash. And we also understand that childcare is important. It's important because families need to have good quality childcare in order to go out and get in the workforce and contribute. And since 2009, when we were elected, we've created 600 new childcare spaces, and we made about 1,000 more subsidies available for parents across the province, which I know from talking to people in my constituency, those measures have been very helpful. And of course, this is kind of an old chestnut, but we should put it out there. We did remove the HST off home energy, and Nova Scotians, I suppose, should be reminded, since we're talking about this, that it was a Liberal party who brought in the tax on home heating, which wasn't taxed until they signed the HST agreement. And when we brought forward legislation to remove it, they voted against it. But we also took the HST off lots of other things, like children's clothing, children's footwear, books, feminine hygiene products, first-time home purchases, new vehicles for the physiologically impaired, computers for the visually and hearing impaired and mentally and physically challenged, firefighting equipment used by municipalities and volunteer fire departments. So it was really quite a suite of products that we tried to cushion by putting those measures in place. And there are many things that our government has done to help make life more affordable and keep more money in the pockets of Nova Scotians, not the least of which, and this is, I think, significant, increasing the minimum wage from $8.60 an hour, which it was when we took office, to $10.30 an hour, which it was as of April 1st, 2013. And there are lots of folks who were having hard times that really appreciated that. Now, with regard to students, because my colleague was talking about students, our government has invested in Nova Scotia's students quite heavily. We increased the weekly amount of financial assistance students are eligible for, and we capped student debt. We introduced a graduate retention rebate, which puts money back in the pockets of recent graduates who chose to stay here and work in the province. You know, my son went to the University of King's College during that double cohort year, and there wasn't anybody on his floor who was from Nova Scotia. And a good many of those students have stayed here. We just heard a bill, language bill, discussed in here a few minutes ago. And what were they talking about? The foreign students who come here. And lots of those foreign students stay here. In my area, my town is going up in population. We had a huge number of immigrants from Germany and Switzerland a few years ago, but we're getting lots of people from the United Kingdom. I just talked to people who moved here from Edmonton the other day, talked to people who moved from BC. So there are lots of people coming to the province, unlike the gloom and doom gang over there that want to say that that's not happening. Now, we have also worked with post-secondary institutions like the Nova Scotia Community College to ensure students are getting education and training that employees are looking for. And I hear this talked about a lot. I worked at the community college. I know how they do it. They talk to industry. Industry says, we need these workers. Then they offer the training. If they think it's too much training, they suspend the course for a year, let those folks get absorbed into the market, and then do a new intake in the future. We know that jobs are essential and very important to Nova Scotians. We had people in this very gallery, where the Speaker's Gallery, Mr. Speaker, we had people here from projects. We had people here from IBM. And the day we introduced them, the opposition parties were talking down the jobs they were bringing. 440 in one case for projects and 500 IBM. Those are good paying jobs. Those are highly skilled jobs, and they're jobs that our Nova Scotia students want. So talking down jobs when you're standing over there on the other side saying, why aren't we growing the economy, discouraging employers from coming here. Baskin-Robbins makes all the ice cream here in Nova Scotia now in a deal with Baxter's Dairy out of Truro. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for people to be saying, you know, gloom and doom when the economy is actually about to burst here a bit. We also recognize the very important role that small and medium-sized businesses play, and we have reduced the small business tax on several occasions, and in many cases, that's the first time in a long time that that's happened. And we recognize that training is important, both for people in the workforce now and for new people coming in. And despite the cancellation of federal funding, which, by the way, in the context of Cape Breton, I think we could say lots about, our government can continue to serve more than 3,000 Nova Scotians who need help entering the workforce. Now, I mean, we could take a little, I don't know, maybe we should take a tour of Cape Breton. Let's go down Highway 19. What's that, Inverness? What about the member for Inverness? Where was he when the Port Hawkesbury Mill was going down? Not in a good place, because he didn't say very much about it. Not in here anyway. Maybe he was talking to people somewhere out in the distance, but he wasn't talking to people in here. Okay, let's go up. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to Victoria the Lakes. Where was that member when they were laying off people in Parks Canada? Where was he? And where is he now? Well, I mean, talk to your friends in Ottawa. Talk to your friends in Ottawa. Let's go to Cape Breton North.
Order, please.
Let's go to Cape Breton North.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West has the floor.
They're scalding my time here, Mr. Speaker, making all that racket over there. What about North Sydney? What about the people that got laid off at the post office there? Did we hear any chirping about that? And finally, Mr. Speaker, what about the lovely fortress of Louisbourg? What about the parks workers who were laid off there? I mean, there's been trouble in Cape Breton. We know that. We want the Cape Breton economy to grow. It's a beautiful place with beautiful people. And you know what? Here's what I think in the final analysis about condemnation. Since the people on that side of the House seem to want to use that word, I would say the future starts here. I would say ships start here. I would say condemnation starts there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in my place and talk about this resolution. And I know the member from Lunenburg. He's very spirited in what he said there, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense and it's pretty much factually incorrect. But you know what? I'm not going to go there. I listened to the member from North, and he made his points from his perspective and from the Cape Breton perspective, and certainly from his caucus. And I'm speaking last here, and I'm not going to go down the road from the government member who just spoke. That's not what I want to do here. What I want to do is talk about the member from Halifax Fairview for a moment. And some of the things he said last night. I've had a ton of respect when that member was the Minister of Finance. I have a ton of respect for him now. I really appreciate extremely smart people, and he is certainly one of those. And I think that when he leaves this legislature, regardless of the makeup and regardless of who's on what side, we will be not as sharp as a legislature when he steps away. So I think he said some... And the reason, Mr. Speaker, why I mention that member is because he said something to me on a couple of occasions during private chats, and he referenced it last night in his speech, and he said, I implore all members and I encourage all members, paraphrasing of course, but to end the partisanship, and he did say on all sides. So he was talking about all three parties and anyone that sits in this legislature. I think that when he says to me on again different occasions, we don't get anything done here. There's a lot of truth in that, and there's a lot of fact in that, Mr. Speaker. And it's become, and I don't think this word is unparliamentary or anyone would disagree with me here. This is a very toxic environment, and I can tell you that I didn't get in here. I didn't come and do this to operate in this kind of environment, and I'm looking forward to next week when we're out of here, and I look forward to being back in Glace Bay. I love my job as it relates to my community, but the negativity and the toxicity that takes place here it's gone too far. And again, the reason why I stress that, Mr. Speaker, is because and the point for that member from Halifax Fairview was that we have no opportunity now, and we don't take the opportunity to learn from each other at all. There's smart people on all sides of the House, people with ideas and people that could really, again, we're in it to create change, and that's slipped away with respect to the legislature, I think, and I think someday I hope it's important to members that we somehow get that back. I don't know if we're on a one-way path with this session. It looks like we are, but hopefully we revert that. And again, I think the value in that, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that we can help each other, and not everything that another party does is a bad thing. And if you look at the budget, I didn't support the budget, and we didn't support the budget because I don't believe that in the context of what took place with the prepayments and with the estimates that it's balanced. However, I'm not focusing on that. One example of a good thing in that budget was the insulin pumps. I think we've all been vocal on the support of that, and the fact that the government made that decision in this budget is a good thing. And that's again why we're here. It's those good decisions, and I think that it doesn't matter. I could care less about past Liberal governments, Mr. Speaker, and I could care less about past Conservative governments. I wasn't elected then. I know one thing, that any of the mistakes that any previous government has made, just like this government, they were judged on by Nova Scotians, and Nova Scotians voted, and the decisions were made. And again, that's not about the current government of the day, but that's the reality of it. So they can talk about decisions and things that happened, and democracy worked, and if they're so right and those governments were so bad, then we know why they're here now. But the reality is that this is their choice, and what we're talking about and what this resolution speaks to is the economy of Nova Scotia. And what really bothers me, I know that the government has their role and has their focus and what they want to do, but what bothers me is it's really not fair to paint the picture of optimism for our economy when the numbers don't support it. And that's fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, that's fundamentally what my issue is with the economic development plan, and with the fact that we spend $150 million per year, that's the budget for the current fiscal, on things related to the economy, and the government will talk about some of the one-offs and some of the things that they like to focus on. However, it's the broad stroke that's the issue. Our provincial unemployment rate, 9.3%, is not reflective of what's happening across the province. Halifax is booming. It should be booming. We want it to be bigger and better and want it to grow and be the regional center for all different types of things, from the universities to the ships to transport to finances, the financial sector, which is big here now, all of those things. But the reality is that Halifax and its booming economy, its local economy, shrinks and diminishes that overall number for unemployment in Nova Scotia. Go outside of Metro, and 9.3 is a dream. And Cape Breton is one example. I know these numbers have been tabled many times, but 11.5% in the Valley. North Shore is 13%, South Shore is 13.2%, and of course Cape Breton is it's north of 18% now and climbing. And we suspect that it'll get worse during the next StatsCan report, which comes out this week. So I guess the point being is that it's one thing to celebrate the Halifax economy and talk about what things are working here and the cranes in the sky and all those types of things, but it's borderline insulting to suggest that the rest of the province is booming and that things are great. And the member will get up and he'll talk about Cape Breton, and he'll, of course, turn the debate federal and talk about Parks Canada. And I've certainly been vocal, and I know that they've hurt the members in this room with the Parks Canada cuts. I know what impact the EI changes have had in our communities. But I also, to echo the comments from the member from Cape Breton West, Mr. Speaker, this is the legislature of Nova Scotia. This is the place where we have to control what we can control, and we control very specific policies with respect to economic development that make a difference. You know, first of all, power rates has impacted our economy across the board, and you know, the point that it impacts an entrepreneur, it impacts a startup, it impacts a small business looking to expand. It's ludicrous to gloss over that fact and say that isn't reality, because it is, Mr. Speaker. The red tape and some of those things that happen, thank you, in the economy and with small businesses, and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business would certainly attest to the impact that's had. The fact that our growth is only going to happen through innovation with respect to entrepreneurships and small businesses. And I think that the mindset of taking a 4- and 5-person operation and turning that into a 6- to 8-person operation, that's the way the economy will grow. 95% of our economy is fueled on small businesses. We always think corporations and those big conglomerates and those international companies, that's not what keeps the economy alive. If you pulled one out of the economy, you took the corporations out of the economy, the impact would not be as great as those small independent operations. So, the reality is that I think, in my own opinion, and I think I have credibility when speaking about business and economic development and those things. 2 minutes, thank you. We've got to switch direction. And again, back to the point about previous governments, I could care less what corporate welfare took place in the 70s and 80s and 90s, because I wasn't there, it wasn't under my control, and regardless of what party, I would like to think that if I was on the government side and I disagreed with an investment or would challenge that, then I would do so. I would, on behalf of the people of Glace Bay. That's all I represent now, and they're the people that I hope to look after as best I can in this legislature. So it's 2013, and we've got to start acting like it's 2013 in this House with respect to how we steer the economy. When you talk about the amounts of money that have gone out, and I'm not going to pound that again because I'm short on time, but that is not the way to do things. It hasn't bared fruit for the province, and we need a drastically different direction. We talk about out-migration, and the member, thank you, and the member opposite talked about university and the NSCC and all post-secondary education. Well, those opportunities are going to be there with small businesses, with startups, and with inside the minds and the skills of those students themselves. We want them to start their own business. We don't want to have, you know, that reality. The mindset is now that people just know they're going to go out west, Mr. Speaker, and we've got to change that mindset. So in closing, the only thing I would like to add and mention to the government that it's not their responsibility, these high unemployment rates and the things that are happening. They're not entirely responsible, but that is the reality, and they've got to use the tools in their toolbox to fix those things. And there's never one easy answer, but it's the direction that we have to be concerned about, and we've got to take away the rhetoric and make sure that we're putting policies in place that put people back to work. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all members for their participation in tonight's debate. That ends the late debate for the evening. We are now adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. We stand adjourned.